Okay, got it. Did you, I guess we can give introductions. I'm sorry, I didn't know if Mark, if you wanted to go first.
Yeah, I can go ahead. So my name is Mark Montalongo. I'm the program manager here in our permits group, oversees the indirect source review program and also our CEQA program and Vera program. And here I have one of my supervisors, Patia Siong, and senior air quality specialist, Michael Corder, who will be presenting on our indirect source review program. So I'll turn it over to Michael and he can go ahead and get started.
All right. I hopefully will not bore anyone. I'll try to keep it moving along, but not go too fast for you guys.
Oh, sorry, Michael, before you get started, sorry to already interrupt you.
No, fine.
Like I just did, how would you, I will help facilitate. Do you want to take questions? Do you mind taking questions as we go? Do you want us to wait till a specific point?
Yeah, no, we can, I guess we can just field it and see how the questions are going. If there ends up being a lot of questions, maybe we can field them to the end just so we make sure we have time to get through the presentation. It's only 9 slides.
Okay.
But that being said, as we're going, if you did have some questions, I'm not opposed to anyone asking questions. If someone will just let me know if there is a question, and if there's additional information, Patia or Mark will definitely chime in to assist with answering it too.
Thanks, Michael. And for those that maybe a question occurs to you and you just want to pop it in the chat, I'm happy to also facilitate and pause Michael and pose the question for you. So whatever you want to do. And awesome. Thanks, Michael.
No problem. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. All right. So as Jessica had mentioned, going to give a presentation on the district's indirect source review program. Hit my next slide. There we go. So you'll also sometimes hear it referred to as the rule number. So this is Rule 9510, indirect source review, kind of as we go along. So you can kind of think of those both together. So for the district, if we did say Rule 9510, or if we said ISR or indirect source review, all of those things kind of correlate together. We're talking about the same thing. So for the indirect source review for the district, it was the first in the nation to be adopted to address, indirect sources requirements to help mitigate emissions from new development projects. And it was implemented in 2006. The purpose of the rule is to mitigate the increase in growth related to new developments for NOx and PM10, NOx being associated with ozone, which is an issue here in the Valley, and then also PM10, which is also another issue in the Valley, that particulate matters. And what happens is the reductions are related to construction and the operational emissions. So with ISR, we promote to incorporate clean air features for project designs to help mitigate those emissions on site. If required reductions aren't achieved through, say, selected on-site mitigation measures, developer can pay an off-site fee for whatever the remaining required reductions needed are. The district prefers, obviously, that on-site measures over off-site fees, but there are cases where sometimes that's just not feasible. And so what happens is all of those off-site fees that are collected, the district use those with our grants program to fund emission reduction projects in the Valley. So whatever emission reductions were the project couldn't get, we make sure through the grant program that we get those reductions. Okay, next slide here. So as far as who's applicable to ISR, development projects that require some type of discretionary approval from a land use agency, meaning an agency that has the ability to say yes or no to approving a project. We have different thresholds. So our listing here is, for example, for residential units, it's 50 dwelling units. And those residential units could be apartments, they can be homes. If they're 50 dwelling units or more and they require discretionary approval, they're subject. If It's 2,000 square feet of commercial space, say like a drive-through, or anything else where you would go retail to purchase stuff, like a Dollar General store. That would be subject if it's over 2,000 square feet. For our light industrial, it's 25,000 square feet, and typically light industrial involves warehouses or distribution centers, basically someplace where goods are stored and then they're obviously distributed to another location. There's 100,000 square feet for heavy industrial space. The heavy industrial space is really focused on manufacturing. There's, I truthfully, this is not a common thing that we have in the valley, because typically for heavy industrial spaces, you'd be thinking of something like, a lot of people, and they're making something like cars, car parts, tires. And so I just want to make sure we're clear on the differences between the heavy and the light. Like I said, the light is you have goods coming in and then you're shipping them out. Next, there's 20,000 square feet for medical offices, hospitals, doctor's office. There's 39,000 square feet for general office space, say like a realtor's office or something. There's 9,000 square feet of educational space, any type of school. There's 10,000 square feet of government space, DMV, maybe CH Highway Patrol office or something. There's 20,000 square feet of recreational space, golf course, parks. And then we have a 9,000 square feet of space that's not identified above, which that can be a lot of different things, such as ponding basins, truck parking lots, any of those things that don't specifically have a category listed above, but did require some type of discretionary approval. For large development projects that do not require discretionary approval, meaning they're going to go through an approval process, but maybe it's just a ministerial, there's a kind of a checklist to go through, and as long as you meet those requirements, your project can be approved. We have a separate threshold applicabilities for those that are listed, that basically just takes our current listing and just multiplies it by 5. So we've done it for each of those, so that those that come through, we can make sure that they're addressed. And then last, we have transportation and transit projects. So like road widening projects, or if there's any type of bus terminals or bus depot going in for transit projects. Okay. Please let me know if we have any questions. I would feel bad if I missed any. So for the ISR emission reduction requirements, the rules designed to reduce emission impacts from development projects to help assist the Valley in meeting its attainment goals for the air quality standards. Developers, subject to the rule, they have to submit what we've referred to as an air impact assessment application and reduce the emissions kind of as follows. So for construction equipment, anything greater than 50 horsepower, they have to reduce their NOx emissions by 20%, basically from the state average. And for PM10, they have to reduce it by 45% beyond the state average. And that's just for construction. For operations, where we're looking at area, energy, and mobile sources, for NOx, it's 33.3% that they have to reduce. And basically what we do is we look at that over a 10-year period. And for PM10, it's 50% reduction. And once again, that's looked at over a 10-year period, since we're dealing with operational emissions. So the emission reductions through project designs is an important thing for the district. The district does provide an extensive list of design features to assist developers to reduce on-site emission reductions. Some of those can include using a clean construction fleet, which basically means you're going to achieve those state average reductions that we were talking about, meaning you're going to be below, you're going to get a 20% reduction of 45, or even basic committing to some type of clean truck fleet. They're going to use cleaner vehicles than are typically used for those type of projects. Or they're going to minimize the vehicle miles traveled. And that can be done in several ways by putting different types of appropriate mixed-use projects together, or having it pedestrian friendly, meaning sidewalks to either traverse by a facility or through a facility or a place. Add some type of energy efficiency measures, and even adding zero emission infrastructure such as solar panels, EV charging, and as more things come along, even eventually probably even hydrogen type stuff. So the benefits are pretty obvious. It helps achieve immediate and permanent emission reductions for the project. The emission reductions are directly benefit the local community since we're getting them on site. And then it also is good for the developers because it can minimize or eliminate offsite fees. So with regards to emission reductions through offsite fees, after we've assessed all on-site clean air measures, offsite mitigation fees are applied to achieve whatever is the remaining emission reduction required by the rule. So meaning if they need to achieve a 33.33% reduction for NOx, if they only achieve 29% on site, that remaining 1.3%, they would have to pay an offsite fee, and the district is going to take that money and find those reductions. And basically, the way we find those reductions is we fund incentive programs that are cost-effective clean air projects in the valley. And some examples of these grant programs can be electrifying or replacing existing diesel-powered agricultural tractors and irrigation pump engines, replacing old trucks, replacing school buses, helping Valley residents purchase electric vehicles, or even help residents repair older, higher polluting vehicles. And then there's the list kind of goes on. We have a lot of different ways in order to just help tackle and get the district into attainment. So the ISR program, as I said in the beginning, started in 2006, still going strong. The district continues to conduct outreach to land use agencies to assist with ISR compliance and basically promote our on-site clean air design, along with basically project design improvements and building practices that we work with. Kind of to date, over 19,000 tons of emission reductions from on-site project design elements have been achieved, benefiting local communities. The district continues to, as always, evaluate the program, meaning like rule stringency, available tools, resources, clean air measures, because obviously as time goes by, there's new technologies that can kind of help us achieve those benefits. So we try to incorporate those things. The district does have a website, which is a great resource with all the stuff that I've listed. It's there from our actual rule to how do you determine if you're applicable, to the listing, like we were talking about earlier, those clean air measures, any number of things. It's a great resource. Maybe if someone can, maybe when we're done, I'll put it in the chat in case anyone wants to click on it to kind of link through, but just be advised that we do have a dedicated ISR webpage, and it's a great resource for any questions you may have afterwards that you want to check on. So with the ISR, like I said, we're continuing our evaluation of it. One of the things the district is aware of is South Coast Air Quality Management District, also sometimes referred to as South Coast. They recently adopted a indirect source rule for warehouses, which is just targeting the operational mobile emissions. And so for that rule, what it does is it applies to new and existing warehouses that are greater than 100,000 square feet. The approach is very similar to the district's rule in that it requires clean air project design elements to reduce NOx and PM particulate emissions. and payment of mitigation fees if necessary, if they can't achieve the required rule, basically the achieved reductions required by the rule. Kind of the way it differs is that it only applies to operational emissions for new and existing, while the district applies to new construction and the operational emissions from various types of developments, not just warehouses, but like we were mentioning, residents, office buildings, any of those things. It is currently under litigation, and the district is currently following it, to obviously see what the outcome is. And as always, the district will continue to evaluate our rule and make any necessary ISR enhancements to the extent allowed under the state and federal regulations, and obviously with case laws. And hopefully everyone's still awake, because that was it. Was there any questions? Everyone was pretty quiet.
I saw lots of engagement. I think people are awake. Definitely did a great job, Michael. Thank you.
Yep.
Thanks, Michael. I went ahead and dropped a link in the chat to the district's indirect source review website. There are a lot of tools there I encourage you to look at. We have brochures, frequently asked questions. Also, more importantly, if you want, specific information in terms of, program-wide, how many reductions we've achieved on-site, off-site, projects we receive, all that information is in our ISR annual reports that we conduct annually. So at the end of the fiscal year, we'll prepare that. Our fiscal year will end in June, so we'll start preparing last year's in July up here pretty soon. So be happy to take any questions if you have.
And I see Mary's hand. Thanks, Mark.
Hi, thank you. Could you, since you have been following this, can you give us an update on what the status is and what are some of the issues that are outstanding regarding that South Coast litigation, please?
So as far as the South Coast rule and its litigation, we're closely following it. I believe they're in the discovery phase right now, so it could take some time in order for that litigation aspect to be resolved, and closely with our legal department as well, and kind of keeping abreast of the issues and what may come out of that in terms of the standing of Coast is interesting.
And correct me if is the point in the issue being raised in litigation, is it the existing warehouses piece, or is it more than that part of it?
I think that is part of it. It's the regulatory of the existing facilities.
I think from last checkup, the trucking agency that brought the case is just questioning the legality of the extent of which they're having this requirement, and they feel that they're reaching beyond what they feel is appropriate. So.
How are you going to handle some of the litigation you have all had in regards to some of your programs that, how are you going back and looking at some of high levels that, are allowed, just following their permit, right? We should be in compliance. Right. So if our permit levels are too high, which I think that must have come to the realization at South Coast, then we're going to have to do a reset. And, how is the district planning on using the indirect source rule to further some pollution? And then the other question that I have would be more to your presentation is on those offsite mitigations, how are the fees and the mitigations distributed amongst the counties in the air basin?
Maybe I can start just to help address kind of your high level first mention, because I want to be, I think just a reminder, and it's a great question, is you just mentioned something about our permit levels, which I think you're acknowledging isn't what we're talking about today. We're talking about ISR. So you're saying the permit levels, if everyone's meeting them, we should be in attainment. I think it's important to know that stationary sources and even sources locally through ISR are not the whole picture of all of the emissions in the valley. And so it's both permit levels is one way to control emissions and, you know, all of the enforcement that goes along with the stationary sources. But another piece, and something I actually dropped in that, was the emissions inventory, is talking about all the mobile sources, some of which of course is trucks, and I think to your point is directed at ISR, but there's also off-road and ocean going vessels. So I'm just saying that out as a reminder. But noting your question, just kind of is more in the future to help strengthen or that rule. I don't know if Mark want to kind of address how following the South Coast rule is
the implementation and litigation aspect of the South Coast rule. And we're always looking for ways to enhance our rule in any which way we can, as long as it aligns with, you know, our attainment plans and attainment status. And so, you know, I think once the outcome of the litigation shakes out, we'll probably at that time have a better idea of, you know, what route we may take in terms of, you know, do we need to enhance our indirect source review? Do we need to make it more stringent? Those are obviously things we'll be evaluating as we learn more about the outcome of the South Coast litigation. And answer your question related to the achievement emission reductions for projects that have to pay. We do work with the program to, you know, ensure emission reduction projects are localized. You know, try our best to fund projects within the area of region. And Cynthia, I do see your question about upcoming projects in the Stockton boundary. So we use obviously the CEQA commenting process to let lead agencies know and project proponents know about our index review after 15 years. And so you know, every project we do comment on, even if it's located inside or outside the 617 boundary. I think one of the most visible projects off the top of my head, when you mention upcoming projects, is probably the Mariposa project, which is a large industrial project along Mariposa Road. It gets about 3 million square feet. So they've submitted an ISR application that's currently incomplete. And so we're waiting on some additional information before we start evaluating that project under our—
Mark, is that a warehouse?
Yes.
There's another warehouse that the Planning Commission may approve today that's 6 million square feet, which you all commented on and CARB commented on, the South Commerce project.
Yeah.
Hopefully that answers your question, Cynthia. If not, let me know.
I think you mentioned it, Mark, but I've heard in questions, like just what you might, I think it was probably in Michael's presentation a little bit too, but just when you're talking about the on-site and then obviously we're paying off-site mitigation, like an example of what, like an on-site mitigation, you know, maybe.
Yeah, so on our website, there's a link there to clean air measures, and that clean air measures document is a laundry list of mitigation measures that developers can you know, incorporate into their project design. Obviously, if there's something that's on that list or that's not on that list, they can propose and we would. Most importantly, sidewalks, EV charging, clean on-road vehicles, obviously electric trucks or, you know, near zero technology, you know, projects that are located near accessible transit like bus stops, installation of bike racks, that kind of thing. There's obviously a laundry list of measures that it's on that clean air measures link on our indirect source review webpage, but those are some examples. Cynthia, I see your
thanks.
hand
And
up.
sorry, I was off camera. I was having a little snack during your presentation. But yeah, thanks for that. I had a follow-up question. There's been a lot of talk amongst the state and in the valley as well about a lot of building electrification initiatives. And I think I've heard really good things about Valley Air being in support of that. So I'm just curious if you guys are looking into ways to maybe incorporate that into the indirect source rule, and promote more electrical, more zero emission things inside the like new warehouses and projects like that. Just kind of curious about how you might be thinking about merging those two together.
Yeah, so how we're currently integrating that is through our CEQA commenting process. So when we do see projects that have like increase in trucks, we are in our comment letters proposing to them, to consider using, clean trucks, clean fleets, whether it's zero or near zero technology, reducing idling, consider truck rerouting. We're also, I don't know if you're aware, the city of Fontana has got a pretty robust zoning ordinance that they've adopted in parallel with the Attorney General's office. And so some of those measures, or I would say a lot of those measures, we're incorporating into our CEQA comments for not only industrial projects, but any project that may potentially result in increase in heavy duty trucks.
And then I think maybe Cynthia was talking more, instead of like truck electrification, building electrification, you're talking like furnaces and heaters and things that like heat the building. I just, from like a planning perspective, and I think Cynthia is one of the folks, watching this carefully, I know that's something we're addressing. Mark, just in general, when we have like rules and regulations that we're developing, I'm imagining that goes into, when we do CEQA commenting letters, that folks have to like comply with those. Is that
right?
Thing that would be addressed? Like if we adopted a rule that like required, or eventually adopted a rule that would be like addressed through that process.
Right.
Cool.
Oh yeah, that's really helpful. So if I know there's a lot of conversation statewide about what kind of rules to adopt for building electrification and things like that. So just for clarity in my understanding, so if you all were to adopt a new rule, would you all have to go back and like change their indirect source rule like permit, or how would that kind of work if there was a new rule that came up and the new warehouses that are popping up or existing warehouses, and there's like building electrification rules adopted within the district? How might that work? Would there need to be like a whole rulemaking process to update the ISR to then get the warehouses and other facilities to update and comply with those rules? Yeah, I'm just kind of thinking long term, because I know the state and the valley have a lot of goals for electrifying in the future, and I think a lot of advocates are really in support of electrifying wherever possible. So just kind of curious about what that might look like in the future, or if you're thinking about that at all.
I think as far as the indirect source review rule, I don't think that's on our radar right now. But obviously, if we open up that rule and we do go through, the public process, we would consider any input that would be given at that time for incorporation or consideration under the ruling, under our rule.
Yeah. Thanks, Mark. That's helpful.
I wish I could predict the future, but I can't.
Yeah, no, I think there's a lot of upcoming things that are going to happen, changes that I'm trying to think about now.
Sure, there's a lot of moving parts, that's for sure.
That is just a good reminder. I think folks, just as a quick segue, but we can come back to this. We've been letting the CSCs know, and I know this group is particularly interested because you are the Regulatory Enforcement Subcommittee, about upcoming opportunities to participate in district-wide rulemaking efforts. So definitely keep a lookout for the emails that come from Stephanie or from just the listserv about those rulemaking efforts. I think it gets to sort of Cynthia's point of ongoing other efforts that are broader than the work that we do just in the community. Any other questions about this before I was going to transition, if we have time, to a little bit of planning ahead for other meetings we might want to have, but definitely we have the team here, so happy to take more questions.
If I could, I'd like to read something here. Is a response to the is anticipated that the best design measures, including State of California Department of Justice's warehouse projects, best practices and mitigation measures, would be considered for incorporation into site and building designs as determined by.
All from the.
I guess I'm going to have to get this emergency. Bye-bye.
I think, though, if I can just, not exactly reading Mary's mind, but her point, it sounds like, was the word considered was an important part of that for her. So I don't know if, Mark, you have just, obviously, can you just describe kind of what our role is and what our, when we come up with those comment letters, and why terms like considered, and, what the opportunities are.
Yeah, I'm not sure on the full context of what she was reading, but if we're talking about considering certain measures to be incorporated into a project, we don't have jurisdiction to require those measures to be included into a project. Ultimately, it's up to the land use agency and obviously feasibility to the project proponent under CEQA to incorporate those measures. So, but under ISR, we encourage them to apply early to consider incorporating some of these clean air measures into their projects to, reduce air quality emissions.
I think that was exactly the context. So thanks, Mark. And knowing Mary's on the phone right now, if we get a chance, we'll update her on that, but just to save everyone else. Any other questions? I'll put a pin and just reminding myself to update Mary so that doesn't cost. Karen.
Yes, I've spoken to Mary about the best practices from the Attorney General for warehouse development. And I guess what, I can't speak for her, but one of the things about the document is there's some real mitigation recommendations for these warehouses during construction to reduce particulate matters. If the wind gets to blowing around, they monitor the air quality, and when the air quality gets to a certain level, that they would stop, so they weren't influencing the community around them to go above and beyond, and that's not happening. And so we like that in there. And there's a lot of things that in the Attorney General's best practices for warehouse development that cover air quality. So while we understand, as you said, that the lead agency makes the ultimate decision, I guess we're just hoping that that document is reviewed and looked at so that you can take some of the real low-hanging fruit and incorporate it into your rules and policies.
Thank you, Karen.
So Mark, yes, thanks. Yeah, Mark, on that Mariposa project, the ISR, do they have any any firm commitments, or what was the problem with the ISR application? Is it difficult to understand, or what were the emissions underrepresented, or what's going on there? And then one other question that I had specifically about the ISR is valuation, right? And so how how are these mitigation fees determined? You know, and I understand that CEQA doesn't require consideration of disadvantaged communities, but is it SB1 as well as the Attorney General's best practices, want to take into account the disadvantaged communities rather than just looking at them as as just outside of the project, right? To really do like a project opponent like to do it like a systems analysis, and everything that's in the surroundings, is just in the surroundings rather than taking into account that we have some populations in our air district, that is overburdened and disadvantaged, and so how is that notion, or is that notion at all considered when developing the mitigation fees?
So the indirect source review rule is for about 15 years. So we treat all projects the same and encourage them to, incorporate clean air measures into their projects. So it's up to the, project proponent for them to select the types of mitigation measures that they're going to incorporate into their project in order for us to quantify the emissions and determine if they're going to achieve the reductions that are required to be achieved under the rule. Obviously, if they're not going to be able to achieve the reductions that are required to be achieved, then those emissions then translate into a mitigation fee where they pay those fees, and we then turn that money over to our grants and incentives department where they go fund emission reduction projects.
And Mark, I have go ahead, sorry.
As specific to your question about the incomplete status of the Maricopa project, it's missing information in order for us to do our analysis, in order for us to quantify the emissions and determine if it will achieve the rural reduction requirements or not. So there's missing information in order to.
And I was going to ask Mark, I know it's a little, it's separate from ISR, but a little bit to Mary's point. Can you talk a little bit? It sounds like, Mary, you've seen some of our CEQA commenting letters. Our CEQA commenting letters, though, when we're talking especially about AB 617, we do include detailed information, particularly about the measures that the 617 community identified in the SERP, right? When we're commenting on projects.
Yeah, that's correct. So if we receive a project from the land use agency, whether it's a city, county, or port, for example, in Stockton, we will say, hey, this project's located in 617. You should consider, incorporating some of these SERP measures into your project design and into your environmental review process. And so we do communicate that to the land use agencies for them to consider.
What about the fees? How much do we get for a pound of NOx?
It's about $9,000 a ton.
Is it an annual fee or is it a one-time fee?
It's a fee. If you multiply it by 10, that covers a 10-year period.
So every 10 years they get a new fee?
No, it's a one-time fee that covers a 10-year
And
period.
if the project continues to pollute for 30 years?
Yeah, our rule is it covers a 10-year operational life. That's in the rule.
That's a problem.
I think it's so important to understand that, as Mark has been saying, we actually get the information from the applicants and we do our own analysis. And from the information that's provided, we do a project-specific analysis, and that modeling gives us specific emissions. And then those emissions are required to be reduced by those percentages that were listed in the presentation. And what happens is, you got to remember, the funding they give us goes to our grant programs. They go find those reductions. So the reductions they find aren't a one-time reduction. When they replace a tractor, that tractor has emission reductions that are over the life of that tractor because it's out of service, and now we have a new one. So that's how
The
Yeah, and that's how
county.
we do the 10 year. That's why we do it 10 years, because we realize, hey, if if it costs for for construction, it's basically $9,350,000. It's $93,500 for the 10-year project, and we find reductions, and we are able to get it to last for the life of the project, because we find projects that aren't just a one and done. They last because they're a lifelong project. So I want to make sure we keep that in mind, because I know it's very easy to think it's just a one-time thing, but we honestly are consciously thinking about that.
And do you go back out, like after 5 years and, verify that they haven't increased their operations?
That now the rule just requires them to submit it the one time, and they provide us of information. I will say, as someone who does these projects, the amounts can add up very fast, and so people do want to actually incorporate these mitigation measures. It adds up really fast for large projects, so they're wanting to incorporate these measures, especially since we're the ones doing the analysis, and we're not just taking their word for it when they tell us, well, our emissions are blank. We do it. Even if they did an emission analysis, we redo it and re-verify. So
We're the ones who do that analysis.
Exactly.
I do see.
Just
go
real
ahead,
quick,
Mark.
if I just add something real quick. So we conduct the analysis, and obviously for each mitigation measure that's selected, we do create a monitoring reporting schedule, that has a compliance mechanism to ensure that the mitigation measure that they selected is occurring. So there is an enforcement aspect that's tied to it.
That was going to be my question. Thanks, Mark. And I do see Karen's hand.
Yes, hi. We have a project that's in the county of San Joaquin, their Tracy Alliance projects. It's a large, I think 3 million plus square feet of warehouses that is proposed and going through the process. I think it goes in front of the city council of Tracy because they're planning on annexing that land on the 18th. And so looking at the letters from the Air Resource Board, they're being told they're over the threshold. And their answer is that the leading agency can approve it when the benefits outweigh, whatever negative impacts the project is creating. And so that's all the whole thing says over and over. And we see this again and again and again with projects in Tracy, that they know that they're not mitigating and they're okay with it. And so we've been having some conversations with the developers, and they're saying, initially they just don't want to do anything. They don't want to talk to us, and they know they don't have to because they can get these things passed through the city of Tracy. So when you say that they want to mitigate it, that's certainly not the experience we're having in Tracy. So I just wanted you to be aware of that. And so, show up at the 18th at the Tracy City Council meeting and watch the same thing we've watched again and again, as it's economically infeasible to do solar and, electrify your fleet that's on site. They just can't compete with the likes of Prologix. It's the same old song and dance every time. But ultimately, I'm sitting here with asthma on the cusp of COPD. I have a friend who's got lung cancer, and, we're asking for some real solutions, not being told that these mitigations are working, because in my town, I'm not seeing that. And I just wanted you to be aware of that.
Thank you, Karen, for sharing. And I know a lot of us, I'm watching us all take notes on some of the great points that folks have brought up today, and I just really appreciate the engagement. We do, if there's, I'll pause for a couple more questions, and otherwise I'd like to, if we have time, but definitely happy to continue this conversation, talk a little bit about our next meeting. We do have a few topics. Even if we don't decide today, I just want to bring up and make folks aware of upcoming discussions I know you are all interested in. But we have Michael, Patia, and Mark still here. And what I'll also say is that folks, feel free to reach out. You have our ab617@valleyair.org email, my email and Stephanie's email. Please reach out to us if there's other questions that you feel like you maybe didn't understand or you weren't prepared to ask right now, or just even some of the resources that you discussed today that you wanted to continue to share with us. We're super happy to take that all in. I just always continually improving and evaluating all of our processes and how we do all of this. So I just appreciate the input we've heard today. Awesome. So I'm going to bring up really quickly. It is not the interactive version. For some reason, I can't bring that up, but I will bring up the PDF version that I just dropped in the chat earlier today of the remaining topics, just to kind of put, maybe some thought out there, maybe here's some quick feedback right now of the other things we were just considering discussing at upcoming meetings. So as a reminder, and the X, by the way, I'll just say the X doesn't mean we're never going to talk about it again. It just means so far we've addressed it, at least in some capacity in certain meetings. And sorry, remind me, can you guys are you looking at this sheet with some
Yes.
on it? Okay, thank you, Mary. So what we did at our very first meeting, probably almost a year ago now, it was definitely like late last summer, is we talked about all of the top NOx emissions sources, all of the top direct PM 2.5 sources. And this is just within the Stockton AB 617 boundary. This is in tons per year. And it was sort of our initial cut at acknowledging that there's sources of concern that you all have, so we're happy to dig into them specifically, but also acknowledging that there's like sources that are aggregate of many little sources, like a truck or a train, or even cooking emissions that contribute on a pretty significant scale compared to other sources. So today is April. We talked about ISR. This doesn't mean this is our last time talking about ISR. But we did want to acknowledge there were 3 topics that were sort of remaining. I know I don't have like a full group with me today, but if any one of these are jumping out to you or you want to add to this list of topics, please either let me know right now. I know we only have a couple more minutes, or like I said, we're going to send out an email. So just be prepared to kind of think about this a little bit. We will work with our community co-host or anyone else who's wanting to work with us, by the way, to prepare. I know Debbie would not mind the assistance and the other input from other folks. So I'll pause right now and see if there's anything that's coming up for you all. Maybe something that if it makes sense to you, something we haven't discussed so far, which is sort of these remaining topics that we have already listed out.
Cooking.
I think that sounds great to us.
Yeah,
that doesn't sound like people are against it. So
yeah, I just was driving past, like a big barbecue, and I don't know, like what everything is, but I understand that there are some counties in the district that have some rules. Is that correct?
Maybe ordinances. There's definitely not on an air district level beyond we do have air district rules for cooking emissions for certain types of cooking. And there maybe are ordinances within certain cities about types of cooking. From my understanding, and Mary maybe help me if this is what I understand, if I recall, especially early on in this process, there was a lot of outdoor like charbroiling that was occurring. Yeah. So in that case, we'd be happy to come and talk about it in May. But yeah, in that case, there might be some cities that have ordinance against it. Right now, it's not an air district thing, but we have been working really hard to try to identify opportunities to even provide funding. Oftentimes, it feels like some of the owners of these places are some of the same community members in which we're trying to work to protect perhaps their community members that are of an EJ population. And that's their sort of like mom and pop business is that cooking. So I know folks have been discussing that and sensitive to that. So we're happy to talk about what we have control over, what rules we have and what efforts we have, and then just talk, in May about it in detail. Karen.
Yeah, this week, the Tracy Press had on the front page these ROTC students at West High and Tracy burning the flag, and you could see the fumes going in these young people's face and their synthetic flags. And I'm like, somebody needs to go talk to these people, what they're doing to these children's lungs.
Yeah,
I was shocked when I saw that. I was just shocked that we're still burning flags.
First of all, that is just shocking in general. Second of all, it is illegal to burn trash. That is absolutely something the district does a lot of outreach on, enforcement on, and certainly also works with like our local law enforcement on things like that. So that's definitely something. Thank you for.
I just look
and
at
maybe
this
Mark. Yeah,
ROTC,
Mark is a good. Mark is a good person to. Yeah, Mark Rasmussen, our other Mark.
Yeah, thanks, Jessica. I'll just jump in real quick to mention we do actually have a specific exemption in our open burning rule for flag burning.
Really?
As long as it's part of a ceremony, it's the proper method of disposing of flags, and that's written into our open burning rule.
Thank you, Mark.
Well, there are people talking about the proper way to dispose them with you're not burning them. And there is, you cut them up and they tell you how to cut them up and then you throw them away. I don't know why we haven't changed the rules. The ceremonial burning is not necessary to dispose of a flag. And I think we need to really think about these kids are in literally over that stuff. You could see it in the picture. And it's like, these are synthetic flags. They have no business burning synthetic flags with these young men standing around these 5-gallon or whatever, how many gallon, 50-gallon drum burn piles.
Yeah, that's, I think, a good. Thank you, Mark, definitely for bringing that to everyone's attention. I'm not a compliance expert, so that's super helpful to know. And then definitely Karen for bringing that up. And I think this is, especially in places where, maybe even just outreach and education would be a good piece of that. So that's a good reminder. All right, it is 5 o'clock. I'm aware of the time and the time you've all spent with us. Like I said, we will be following up on soliciting input for other upcoming topics, but it does sound like, and we can be prepared for our next subcommittee meeting to be about cooking emissions and kind of all related sort of enforcement or regulatory positions on that. Great. Well, thank you, Michael and Patia and Mark and everyone. But definitely thank you to Mary and Karen and Cynthia for your engagement today too.
Yes.
And Karen and Alex.
Goodbye. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Goodbye.